Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing our Uniting the North series with episode 3, titled 渡己. Now we ended our last episode as Cao Cao retreated from the siege at Ye on Guojia's recommendation. But before we discuss the aftermath of this retreat, we need to first turn our sights to the western front, as while Yuan and Yuan were put under siege, their cousin, Gao Gan, in the Bing province, attempted to divert Cao Cao's attention by organizing a separate attack on the Hedong region. Under instructions from Yuan, the administrator of Hedong, Guo Yuan, informed Gao Gan, who was the prefect of the Bin province, that Yuan desired to open up the western front. So, relying on their positive relations with the southern Xiongnu tribes, they first approached their chieftain, Ranti Hu Chuquan, for an alliance. Now, Ranti Hu Chuquan was the younger brother of the late chieftain, Yu Luo, who, if you remember from our Cao Cao and Yuan Shu series, had actually fought against Cao Cao twice as an ally of Yuan Shu. Sadly, he was defeated in both attempts. So, continuing his brother's footsteps, Ranti Hu Chuquan agreed and joined Gao Gan's coalition. And to ensure their success, Gao Gan also sent delegates to Ma Teng and Han Sui in an attempt to lure them out of their neutrality, as they had previously negotiated a non-aggression pact with Cao Cao's official, Zhong Yao. Tempted by promises of wealth, Ma Teng and Han Sui agreed to join this attack as they all teamed up targeting Hedong Commandery. Now this time, the Hedong Commandery was a heavily contested spot. While technically under Cao Cao's jurisdiction, it was situated north of the Yellow River, as it was isolated and surrounded in the north by the entirety of the Bin province. While Yuan had named Guo Yuan to become the administrator of Hedong, Hedong technically already had an administrator, sanctioned by Cao Cao and the imperial court, and his name was Duji. Now, Duji was born in 163 in the Yong province and was a well-known local child prodigy. By the time he came of age, or when he was 20, he was already the commandery's prosecutor. A firm believer of Confucianism, Duji was very lenient, but a hardworking prosecutor. When he first took over the job, the local jail had an overcrowding issue, with hundreds of prisoners as the casework overwhelmed the local bureaucracy. So the first thing Duji did was go over all the case files, and for anyone dealing with a light crime, they were released, while heavier crimes were dealt with justly. And while there were some complaints about this, most of his supervisors were quite pleased with him, and very soon he was recommended to join the imperial court in the capital. But unfortunately, this was the period of Yellow Turban rebellions and Dongzhuo's tyranny. So, in order to protect his family, Duji would eventually resign, as he would lead his family into hiding in the Jin province, taking refuge in the south. Then, after living as a commoner for many years, his stepmother would actually die of old age. And since the roadways back then were a little bit safer compared to the Yellow Turban days, Duji decided that he was going to take on the job of transporting his stepmother's coffin back to his hometown in order to bury her alongside his father. But unfortunately, even without yellow turbans on the road was pretty dangerous and filled with bandits. And very soon, Duji, along with some other fellow travelers, would run into a band of bandits. And while most of the travelers fled, Duji, who was traveling with his stepmother's coffin, could not actually run. So he stayed, as he told the bandits, who were about to shoot him with an arrow, that he understood that they are robbing people for money to stay alive. But he, unfortunately, doesn't have any money, and all he has is this coffin. Killing him would do nothing but add 2 bodies to the road. Agreeing with him, the bandits actually left him to continue his journey, as they went after the other fleeing travelers who might have money. Then once Duji made his way back to his hometown, he would end up bumping into an old friend and former colleague in Zhang Shi, who was serving at this time as Chang'an's captain of the city guards. So after burying his stepmother, he ended up joining his friend in Chang'an and was recommended to once again become a prosecutor. But unlike when he was younger, his new boss and friend Zhang Shi did not like how lenient Duji was. So the two would often argue over it, and it was during one such argument that Zhang Shi accused him of being a bad prosecutor, that Du Ji replied that even though I might not be a good prosecutor in your eyes, I still have more than enough talent to become at least a very capable administrator of your hometown of Hedong. But soon after, wanting to preserve their friendship before it deteriorates farther, Du Ji would resign, as he would decide to try his luck in the capital city of Xuchang, as he tried to get a job in the imperial court. But after arriving, Du Ji had no luck, as no one was offering him a job, but he did manage to strike it off with Geng Ji, who was an imperial court attendant at the time, and more importantly, the neighbor of Xun Yu. So one night, while visiting Geng Ji's residence, the two of them had a discussion over national policies, and this discussion caught the ears of Xun Yu, as Xun Yu ended up spending the entire night with his ear glued to the wall, trying to make out the conversation within Geng Ji's residence. Then the next day at court, Xun Yu approached Geng Ji and asked him which official was his guest last night. And upon hearing that Du Ji was actually just a commoner, Xun Yu quickly recommended him directly to Cao Cao. And always trusting of Xun Yu's eye for talent, Cao Cao immediately promoted Du Ji to the position of the secretary of the prime minister, thus making him Cao Cao's assistant. And after working with Du Ji for a few years, Cao Cao knew Du Ji was not only talented, but also dependable, as he eventually would promote him to become the administrator of Hedong, to replace the current administrator there named Wang Yi, who, despite being well-loved, was more of a Han loyalist rather than a Cao Cao loyalist, and fearful that he might be convinced to work with Gao Gan, Cao Cao decided to offer him one of the 9 minister positions in the capital in order to convince him to leave his post and replace him. At first, Wang Yi wanted to remain as an administrator, as he felt he would be able to impact more people's life that way. So he ordered his 2 lieutenants to place guards all along the borders, as he went to his direct supervisor, Zhong Yao, to plead his case. But Zhong Yao is a Cao Cao loyalist and knew exactly why Wang Yi needed to be replaced. So he ended up giving Wang Yi a good scolding and told him to leave his administrator seal and report to the capital for his new post. Furious and humiliated, Wang Yi angrily kept his seal, as he stated that he was going to go to the capital and plead his case to the emperor directly. And with Wang Yi's lieutenants still guarding the borders, Zhong Yao was also angry now too, as he would order General Xiahou Dun to mobilize his men and wipe out all of Wang Yi's guards to clear the way for Du Ji to take his post. Hearing this, Du Ji would stop Zhong Yao, as he stated that 30,000 households live within Hedong Commandery. All of them wish to live in peace. No one has joined Wang Yi's guards and rebelled, and if we mobilize troops into Hedong, then it would force them to defend their home for their former administrator. At that time, if General Xiahou Dun cannot put down the rebellion, then Hedong will be lost. And even if General Xiahou Dun comes out victorious, the loss of civilian lives would also destabilize the region. Right now, those guards have not rebelled. They're just on the border to support their former administrator. I will go alone as their new administrator. I doubt they will kill me, and given that they still consider themselves citizens of the Han, they will have to at least pretend to accept me, whether they like it or not. At that point, give me 1 month, and I promise I can make them truly accept me as their new administrator. So Du Ji went to Hedong alone. Now the 2 lieutenants here are named Wei Gu and Fan Xian. And of the 2, Wei Gu actually knew Du Ji from when Du Ji was just a prosecutor back in his hometown. So at the very least, Wei Gu managed to convince Fan Xian to not kill Du Ji right away. But just to make sure Du Ji knew his place, they executed roughly 30 minor officials to demonstrate that they meant business and that they were capable of killing Du Ji if he didn't play nice. And Du Ji played nice, as he would play a very cowardly new administrator, as he would tell Wei Gu and Fan Xian that he was just here to be a figurehead, and that they are the true decision makers here in Hedong. And to make them believe him, Du Ji would hand over the command of all 3,000 troops within the Hedong Commandery to these two lieutenants and allow them to freely use their own wealth to expand their force to their liking, while keeping only a dozen or so guards for himself. Then, after a brief recruitment drive by these two lieutenants, Du Ji then went on to suggest to the both of them that in order to win over support of the newly recruited troops, it's best to allow all the officers and captains to take a short break by allowing them to return home instead of staying at the army camp for a few days. Not suspecting much, as Du Ji really had no power at this point, they gave all their commanding officers a short break, as they were all allowed to go home for a while. And it was during this period that Du Ji actually secretly met up with a few of the officers, and through a variety of means such as bribery, he ended up gathering a small group loyal to him. Then not long after, Golgan's forces, along with his allies such as the Southern Xiongnu tribe and the Xiliang warlords, would start to arrive around Hedong as they attempted to supplant Du Ji essentially and replace him with Guo Yuan, which is appointed by Yuan Shang. Immediately, Du Ji would gather up the few hundred troops loyal to him as they would escape to a nearby fort as they prepared to defend it until a reinforcement from Zhongyao would arrive. And seeing Gao Gan's massive army, Wei Gu and Fan Xian would actually immediately surrender as they would volunteer to use their force of 3,000 to bring back Du Ji's head. But as all this was happening, Du Ji was rallying local civilians to come to his fort as he advertised that it was well stocked with food and was the only safe place from these nomadic and Xiliang raiders who are now here to raid them. And very soon, people flocked to Du Ji in the tens of thousands, as he was easily able to recruit about 4,000 young and able militiamen to help defend their fort. And not only were they able to withstand Wei Gu and Fan Xian's attacks, even when Gao Gan came himself, the fort held. And while Gao Gan attacked Hedong, Zhongyao, who was in charge of the entire Guanzhong region, also got busy, as he once again returned to the negotiation tables with Ma Teng and the Xiliang warlords, where he once again managed to convince them to switch sides, back to supporting Cao Cao. So instead of coming to help Gao Gan take Hedong, Ma Teng actually ended up sending Zhongyao 10,000 cavalry, led by his son Ma Chao and General Pang De, as they rode from the west to rescue Hedong instead. Then from the east, General Xiahou Dun's army, which had been on standby ever since Du Ji went into Hedong in case something went wrong, also mobilized, as they now trapped Gao Gan's forces in a pincer attack within Hedong. Then in the battle that followed, Zhongyao's forces would catch Guo Yuan and the Southern Xiongnu tribes as they were crossing the Yellow River, and their forces were shattered immediately with the help of Ma Chao and his cavalry. And in the midst of the battle, Pang De would actually behead Guo Yuan. And witnessing Guo Yuan's death, the Southern Xiongnu chieftain, Wan Ti Hu Chu Quan, ended up immediately surrendering to Zhongyao's forces, as now Gao Gan was forced to pull his forces out of Hedong before Xiahou Yuan's forces would finish the collapse on them from the east. And in the aftermath, Wei Gu and Fan Xian were both executed, but all their troops were spared, thanks to good grace and leniency from Du Ji, as he now officially became the new administrator of Hedong. As for the former administrator, Wang Yi, he would never see the emperor, as Cao Cao would end up calming his concerns, as he would end up being promoted to become Minister of Agriculture, as all was forgiven on both sides. And with that, we're going to be able to end our episode here. As the Bin province front comes to an end, we'll continue next time, where we will finally return to the infighting between Yuan Shang and Yuan Tan, as Cao Cao has finished his retreat from Ye, removing this common threat to both of them, as it will allow them to show their true colors, providing Cao Cao the perfect opportunity to finally eliminate the Yuan clan. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!